Welcome to Inside Marketing with Market Surge, your front row seat to the boldest ideas and smartest strategies in the marketing game. Your host is Reed Hansen, Chief Growth Officer at Market Surge.
Hello and welcome back to Inside Marketing with Market Surge. Today we're joined by Maria Del Pilar Casal, an award-winning marketing executive with more than 15 years of experience driving results for some of the world's biggest brands, including Unilever, Toyota, and Verizon. Maria Pilar has built and led marketing campaigns that don't just look good on paper, they deliver measurable business impact. From creator marketing and branded content to media and partnership strategies, she's helped brands connect with audiences in ways that are both innovative and effective. What I love about Pilar is that she doesn't just talk high-level trends. She breaks things down into practical, actionable steps that companies of any size can use to grow online right away. This is going to be an incredibly insightful conversation for founders, marketers, and anyone looking to understand how to turn digital strategies into real growth. Pilar, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I have to give
Yeah.
you credit on the pronunciation of my name. Thank you. You said it
Oh,
wonderfully.
thank you. I try. It's one advantage of doing an undergrad with a major in Italian,
Yeah.
but it hasn't served me in many other facets of my career.
We'll
But
we'll have to practice. Maybe we'll go have a nice Italian meal in your
awesome.
area and I'll let you order for
There's
us.
some good ones. Absolutely. Well, Pilar, AI is changing how campaigns are built and optimized. And, I know you've been in the forefront of, this kind of innovation, working for these big brands. How have you seen how AI has reshaped how brands connect with their audiences? And it'd be interesting. I'll preface this by saying a lot of my audience are small and medium-sized business leaders and marketers. So your perspective from working with larger brands, I think, is particularly interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think to your question on how AI is changing how brands engage and how
Yeah.
they're marketing to consumers, I would say it's two pronged. The first is that it's changing the consumer journey and therefore the marketing funnel, but also how consumers expect to be engaged with. So on the first front, we're seeing that for Gen Z, which is the consumer that brands tend to be focusing on more and more, even though Gen Alpha is right around the block. But for Gen Z, social and YouTube and TikTok have been really the big kind of focuses of discovery, where they're figuring out what they want and also where they're getting a lot of recommendations, including now we've seen an uptick also in platforms like Reddit, right? So consumer kind of generated recommendations. What's interesting about AI is that AI is popping up, or these AI tools are popping up like almost a third influencer in that dynamic of how they're making their decisions. So you have them using tools like Chat GPT to not only ask it questions and maybe Google, but really to make entire life decisions. They're spending a lot of their day asking it questions, telling it about their lives. And so the way in which they discover and make decisions is starting to change. So what that means for brands, big and small, is that you have to then make sure you're showing up in these spaces where they're now making these decisions. And I think it's being referred to now as AEO, and I've seen a few different acronyms, but it'll be different from search engine optimization, right? Which I think that was a lot of keyword based searching. And now we're seeing with AI and AI tools that it's a lot more of kind of utility based content. Now, how you show up there, I think I won't offer recommendations yet. There's a lot of great content on the internet about it, but I think that's going to continue to really evolve and the tools will begin to decide and set parameters for how brands can show up there. But on the second front, and a little bit more of a simpler change, is that AI tools are incredibly personalized. And so the consumers who are using them, particularly Gen Z, as we mentioned, are becoming very used to having personalized recommendations, personalized interactions. And so I think that'll start to affect how brands engage with consumers on social, but also on their website and email, and being able to really personalize what you do, but also more deeply target consumers. The great thing I think for small and medium businesses is that this is what they're really good at, because I think you earn each of your customers just by pure sweat and grit, and you know them all deeply in a way that big brands sometimes they know their consumer, but sometimes not as intimately because it's been so long they've been building the base. So I think it's an area where small businesses can really excel.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I was going to get there. AI obviously is like very accessible. It's not,
Mhm.
it can be inexpensive to use and it can be fairly easy to learn. That said, to go along with the last point you made, do you think that AI is going to help small and medium sized business marketers more, or does this continue to give the big brands the advantage?
Yeah, I think it can. There's two answers that I would give to that.
Yeah.
One of the things I think big brands are figuring out is how they're going to use AI because we don't know what the future of that platform looks like, right? It's very similar to social, in which brands went all in, publishers went all in, and then suddenly the platforms changed the algorithm and how you could access your community. So I think brands have learned that they have to be very mindful of how they build in certain spaces and how they engage with consumers in certain spaces because they may not own that space at the end of the day. And so if you think of a brand spending a lot of time training and putting their information into AI tools, then to not know what kind of happens to that information and to that time that they've spent. I see brands beginning to build their own internal AI. So I mentioned all that to say that I think they will be slower to adopt, right? They'll depend much more on third party tools that they already use, using AI to be more efficient in the work that they do. For small and medium sized business, you don't have many times those same constraints, right? Especially if you're the start of building, you can give your whole self to the tool and pull from it. Where I think it would probably be most helpful for a small and medium sized business is to look at one, what's taking up most time of your day, and two, where you have gaps in headcounts. One tip I would give is maybe write out what your day looks like and what are your pain points and feed it into your preferred AI tool. And you can even ask it to recommend for you where it thinks that the tool, can be most helpful to you. What I've seen is that, and I may be biased because I'm a marketer, I don't feel that AI is fantastic at creative yet. I still think humans are a lot better at that. So I'll hear many times they say, "Oh, have it write copy for you." I don't love the copy that comes out of it. But if you say, imagine smaller businesses have more limited headcount. If you have a person who's really great at doing your social and your creative, not so great at the numbers, AI can be a great way for them to grab reports and bulk download data, feed it to that tool and ask it to give it patterns or trends that it's seeing. Because AI is very good at predicting behavior and at finding trends and patterns in data. So I think when it comes to reporting, to analyzing data, to you can upload within data privacy restrictions, of course, but upload in commentary that you're getting on a social post or maybe the reviews you're getting on your website and have it comb through that data and make recommendations back to you. I know some folks are also testing with video creation as well. I don't see that it's quite where it needs to be yet. I think that's the next frontier once it gets really good at creating video and ads, and I think it will level the playing fields even more.
That's I think it's encouraging the way you describe it. I am a small and medium sized business owner, and I use AI quite a bit, and I do feel like it extends my ability to do things. Like a lot of tasks I wouldn't want to take on if I didn't
Mhm.
have AI to generate. Now you touched on content, and I know this is an area you work a lot in, and so given that, and I know you've worked in the influencer space as well, what do you think are the content formats that are really resonating right now and in the near future? Whether it's towards the end of the year or looking forward to 2026, what kinds of content should brands be focused on?
Yeah, so I think we hear frequently that video is where everyone needs to put all of their focus and attention. My answer varies on that, which is that I think, or rather, I should say, sorry, I'm going to start over. I know we'll hear a lot about focusing on video. My answer would be much more to focus on each of the platforms that you're on and your audience. We hear frequently that consumers have short attention spans. What I would offer is that I think the time a consumer wants to spend deciding whether your content is interesting or not is what's really decreased because there is so much content to choose from. And so it's really important to have content that is going to grab that person's attention. And I think we default to that has to be video, but it really depends the platform that you're on and what your goal is. So, for example, I've seen a lot of brands are starting to play a little bit in the Substack space. Substack right now is not a place where maybe you're going to get thousands of views and hundreds of thousands of comments, but it might be a place where you can do some really deep brand engagement with a hyper focused consumer group, right? So, if you have a particular product launch where you're this product and this consumer, they let's say it's a higher end product that requires a little bit of explanation on its quality and its manufacturing style. And that's why it calls for such a high ticket price. That might be something that works really great in Substack if you find your consumers of whatever good it is, maybe high end luxury goods, who appreciate longer form content that's more explanatory and who will engage with that type of content. And then you're on TikTok where you might want to be much shorter and to the point. So, what I would say is focus on your content thematics and what you're going to share, and then share that out in various formats. So you want to always record with video and audio, and then from there you can draft content, which is where AI can be really great. So for example, if we were doing this podcast, or we are doing this podcast episode, we have audio and visual from it, but you could get clips for TikTok. You could use the text file from the podcast to craft a newsletter. You could use the text to then maybe craft a longer form article for Substack, wherever you're present. But I think there's various formats that are working really well. You just have to adapt to the audience and to the platform. We're seeing video as always, long and short form, depending on the platform. And TikTok has been seeing some success with longer form. It just depends what you're talking about, as well as longer form text content on platforms like Substack and even
Okay.
LinkedIn. Yeah.
So even talking about trends, I is content that a brand produces, is there like a certain life cycle you should plan for, or a duration where it's valuable? You were talking about like Substack or long form video for like deeper explanations of a product, or do you feel like that there is content that is durable, that is like long term, or should you think of it all as kind of like consumable and short term?
Yeah, so I think you have your evergreen and then you have your very kind of timely, which is reacting. It's in a time and place and it's reacting what's happening to the world around us, whether it's in tone or in the content that it features. I would say with AI, I know people use these tools, your content always has to be useful in some way. And if it's going to be evergreen and last longer, there has to be a utility component to it. So think of how people are searching on an AI, like a chat GPT, right? They are maybe already have a product in mind, but they're being very specific with their questions. Does this work for me specifically? I'll give you an example. Weighted vests were trending. I wrote an article on this actually, were trending, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get a weighted vest. This was everywhere all over my TikTok. So I asked my chat GPT, I'm like, hey, can you tell me some pros and cons on weighted vests? Because I wasn't like 100% sure. And ChatGPT remembered that I had abdominal surgery and let me know that I actually
Oh,
can't use weighted vest. They said for someone like you recently had abdominal surgery, you can't use a weighted vest. And so I think you have to, I give that as an example that you have to make sure you're creating content that is very utility driven, but also keeps things in mind. So it's not just, hey, weighted vests are great for exercise. But if I were creating content on that, I might say, by the way, if you have an injury or you're recovering, maybe instead get these wrist weights that I sell also. So I think if you're creating longer form content, sorry, not longer form, if you're creating longer tail content, you have to keep in mind the different obstacles that may come up in someone's decision making process, because you want that content to not only surface up in AI, but to be useful over a longer term. But you should have a combination of both. And I think the content that you're creating that's much shorter form, ensuring that it's timely. But I think utility content is what people always go to. They want to know how to use things. They want to know more about what's going on. And so that longer form content, that longer tail content works really well.
can you mentioned something, and I would like to pick your brain on. We're on a podcast, which I think is great content and nice to repurpose. And I'd put like a one other dimension of this. The cool part of this is that it's a collaboration. That we're
Mhm.
both going to share it.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to learn a ton from you and be able to share your expertise with my audience. I don't know if I'm going to add much to your audience, but we'll play it off as if it is. But the question I have is, what do you see as the benefits of collaboration, whether it's like this with a partner or with somebody that's like just, you know, outright an influencer? How do you see that as a valuable for a brand, to undertake?
Yeah, so I say I think at its simplest form, and we see this in music, right? You're uniting two audience groups. And so when you have two audience groups, you're always going to be more powerful, you have more eyeballs. What is special for brands with a collaboration, if it's a creator, an influencer, or celebrity, is that a brand already reaches the people it reaches as itself. You can talk all day about how wonderful and amazing you are, but it's until someone else says that you're amazing or wonderful that someone might be convinced because you've maxed at how much you can convince someone of your own worth. And so I think having that secondary voice that leans in and says, hey, this is actually really fantastic, you should check it out, leaning into that special relationship, leaning into their own engagement, to their own community, is what really is additive in the process. I also a brand can't be everything to everyone. And so when you bring in other collaborators and other voices, they find the unique aspects of your product that speaks to different consumer groups. And as I mentioned earlier, with the personalization that's happening with I think we're going to see brands really need to like niche further and further down in their efforts. And realistically, no brand can do that, right? There's not enough content in the world. But if you're collaborating with different influencers and influential voices, they can do that for you. And so your one product that maybe you have three or four ways that you would speak about in three or four main consumer groups, now you have influential voices within those broader consumer groups that can talk to specific subsets and do in a very specific and particular way that's also quite authentic and organic. And I don't, it's really unfeasible for a brand to be able to do that each way.
Okay. Now, how do you, I think you've talked to like the value of it. How does a brand, maybe even with limited resources,
Mhm.
do this like on a regular basis, create content or find collaborations that are really of
Mhm.
value? Is there like a good process for that? Or, how do you vet the right collaborators? How do you do that?
Yes, the great brands are big brands are lucky because they hire an agency and they spend a lot of money on tools. That's obviously not feasible, I think, when you're starting
Yeah.
a business or you're not a Procter and Gamble. But so I'll offer two things. The first is I spent a lot of my career actually working in local markets doing social and streaming at a one or two market level. And what I learned there is that micro creators, nano creators, and local creators, which are creators that might have a slightly larger following but are very specific to an area, are very effective at driving sales beyond
Mm.
the upper funnel brand awareness and brand engagement. They're really good at sales because they do have this more niche community, and the relationship can be much deeper because they have traditionally a smaller following. And so I think for small and medium sized business, looking first at if your product is primarily for a specific consumer area, a specific market or specific city, finding influencers who are not necessarily huge and have huge price tags, but finding someone whose following is really specific to that area or who's well known locally can be really helpful. But also looking at micro creators in generally, right? So you might be someone who sells a product across the US, but it has a very specific group. So for example, maybe you have a paleo, vegan, dairy free product. You might be better off with a YouTuber who has a small community of a few thousand, but whose community shows up every day for that particular product, than pairing up with a big foodie influencer whose audience is getting messaging all day long on all different topics and who goes there for a variety of food topics, which is much more focused. So one I would recommend, I would lean into those smaller creators and the
Mhm.
smaller followings. And typically their rates are much more manageable. They're willing to come into longer term partnerships where maybe you can do a content over time and pay a flat fee per content piece or post. In terms of finding them, I think if you don't have a tool that's accessible to you, right? There's tools that exist now, but that's not accessible. Just engaging on the social platforms and constantly saving whatever you come across. I know a lot of social media managers for smaller brands will have what they call a burner account so that the algorithm doesn't go too close to their own interests and they're able to see everything. And they will just, when they're scrolling at any time that they see something interesting, save it. I also find LinkedIn to be really useful for finding influencers because they tend to be really good about showing the business side of what they're doing on LinkedIn. And so you can usually do a search on there that's pretty helpful. You might also ask ChatGPT and see what answer you get, or
Oh,
Perplexity or
yeah.
Claude.
So this is actually something I'm personally interested in, and forgive my indulgence, and something I'm very interested in. Now, say you do have a little bit of budget that you'd like to seek out
Mhm.
influencers and collaborators. What are some of those high end tools that you would recommend using to find good collaborations?
Yeah, so there's Creator IQ. That was one that I
Okay.
use, and you could input information in it to source it. Off the top of my head, I'd have to think about some
Okay.
of the
And that's
other.
okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
But one item that, yeah, Creator Key is a tool I've used for a long time. And I think that's still their name. I will tell you one other really great place to find local micro nano creators in your commentary. Look at your best customers. You'd
Yeah.
be surprised how many of those customers actually have a pretty strong following, but see who's making content about you already and you can
Hmm.
source. There's also a new one, I think it's Passionfoot, it may be
Oh,
called,
okay.
which is a site where people can monetize and put themselves, and it has to be smaller creators, put themselves up there to be selected. So I know there's a few new tools and few websites that are much more accessible. Those influencers I see start at like $400 per post or even less.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, super helpful. And I think that, I mean, I'm a big fan of collaboration. That's kind of why I'm doing this effort of the podcast. I like to meet new people. You never know when a connection might pay off down the road, and
Yes.
the things you can learn, the people you can connect to, like peripherally. The people like yourself, Pilar, that are willing to come on these podcasts. You tend to be a type that's like a super connector. You know a
Mhm.
lot of people, and you tend to make the effort to connect with people. So you are good kind of people to know. So let's zoom out a little bit, and maybe let's or predict. What do you think in the next 3 to 5 years? What kinds of changes do you think we'll see in the marketing function or content creation? Do you think that largely be the same, or do you think it'll be completely different? I mean, is AI going to just disrupt everything?
So what I think is, I know, and I feel like we see it depends on the day. One day it's like AI is useless, it's doing nothing. Look at the output it gave me. The next day it's like AI is taking over everything. Our jobs are all gone. The world's forever changed. So I would say probably the next few months, because I think the speed at which AI is moving is what is probably most interesting, alarming, depends how you feel
Sure.
about
Yeah.
it. So it's changing quite quickly. And just for reference, I was seeing in DigiDay this article they did that said that now one out of every five referral clicks to Walmart comes from an AI tool,
Oh,
and it's only they said their traffic, it's less than 5% of the total traffic they get, but that's up 15% from July. So where this article came out, let's say a week ago in September, so that kind of growth in just July, August, September is in less than 3 months is incredible. So I don't know if we'll have 3 or 5 years. We may have a few months, 1 year. It will take time though, for as I mentioned earlier, it's going, and this is the part that I think sometimes gets lost in a lot of the conversation. It will take time for companies and for brands to integrate this. This will take time because they have a lot of legal they need to figure out, right? Again, they're putting a lot of data, or they want to avoid putting a lot of data into tools that they do not own. And they're having their employees, or would be having their employees, spend a lot of time and resources training tools, again, that they do not own. So that's something that they have to be very mindful of. But I think what we'll see the most change is in the referral traffic. We've started to see already, and I don't have the percentage, but I know Google is reporting that there has been a drop in how much traffic is going past the search engine results page because they have that AI answer. And so people are
yeah.
seeing the answer there and sticking there. So I think most immediately what you're going to see is a drop in traffic to your sites. Some people say you may get more qualified leads at your site, though, because the people who come through will have come through recommended specifically to your site. I think that has yet to be seen, but we're seeing a drop in traffic to the site. That's obviously going to affect for all kinds of publishers their digital media, right? So is it worth spending and buying digital media ads on websites? Will they have enough impressions to sell because people aren't visiting the sites as much? I think this is where your email, your newsletter, all of that will become more important. So probably digital media, I think, will be the most affected most immediately. That'll become, I'm going to assume, I'm not going to make a blanket statement, but I assume those will become less effective. And so
Yeah.
social and video, premium video and streaming environments will probably become the most effective digital media tools. And then I think the personalization is just going to become really important. It's not going to be enough to just say, hey, look at this great product. It's like when social and creators popped up and people moved their attention and started listening to other voices. There is this now new voice that's speaking for you, and brands will have to make sure they show up there. But like I mentioned earlier, we still don't know what that means. I did see that, and I believe it was Sam Altman for ChatGPT who announced that there will start to be an option in the pro version to opt into receiving kind of morning tailored recommendations and information, which to me reads like ads. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think within a few months we may, and I say a few months, maybe it's a month and a half, but we may have an actual ads product coming out of OpenAI and for ChatGPT. And of course, that'll just put the pressure on everyone else to speed up their ads product. But I think I can't imagine that in the next 6 months, we won't be seeing maybe advertising on the platform and dollars will start to shift from digital media to these platforms. Or at the very least, we're already seeing dollars shifting to creator, the maybe digital dollars shifting more into social into creator.
Well, that I think that sounds right. I mean, it's not necessarily good news, but it feels like it's the inevitability of things.
It's
They're,
not
they're
It's not,
Go
I think
ahead.
it's, listen, if you're a publisher and your bread and butter is the website, it's not great news. But I think it's a good
Right.
reminder that you need to have a diversified monetization strategy. So it can't, and I don't think that many businesses have placed all their, or publishers have placed all their bets on the website. The issue is that it goes again back to ownership. Many publishers put so much effort into social media, and every time that algorithm changes, they would get hit and their referral traffic would get hit. But at the same time, because they own their websites, that's where they wanted to make sure they were getting where they were putting most of their efforts driving folks to the website. And so this continues to decrease. That's why I mentioned newsletters and any way of capturing proprietary data and first party data, right? So email, no one can ever take your email list from you. Email, I don't know that's going away, at least in the next few years. So I think it's important to always make sure that if you are a publisher, if you're a content creator, if that's your business as the content people consume, that going back to our earlier point, you are diversified in where you're present and in the content formats the content formats that you leverage, right? We don't know what's going to happen with TikTok. What will the sale look
Hmm.
like? Does that mean a new app? Does that mean the algorithm's different? Are you losing followers? We don't know any of that. So I think it's not great news, but it's just a reminder that you really have to diversify what you're doing and embrace what's coming because it's
Yeah.
here regardless of whether you jump on the ship or not.
Well, this is a lot of great information, Pilar. I appreciate you sharing so much. I think you've got some great experience and some in with some big enterprise brands. So
Mhm,
that's great for our audience. Now, if people would like to work with you, I understand you
mhm,
offer consulting, and
mhm.
if they would like to work with you, collaborate with you on content, how can they find you?
Yes, the best way, I probably should be building up my email list and follow my own advice. The best way to reach me is on LinkedIn, and I can share it for the notes here for the post, but
Great.
it's Maria Del Pilar Casal. You can find me. And I used to be the only Maria Del Pilar Casal on LinkedIn.
Oh,
Now there's four of us. It's global. One of them is in
yeah.
Argentina, so I'm the only one in the US. But there's
Okay.
more people popping up. But you can find me on LinkedIn, send me a DM. I'm very responsive there. And yeah, reach out for a chat or to learn more.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Pilar, and we will look forward to future collaborations and following the great content you put out.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate the time. This has been a really great conversation.
Want to stay ahead of what's actually working in marketing right now? Head over to marketsurge.io and see how we're helping businesses grow smarter, faster, and louder. That's marketsurge.io, because your next breakthrough shouldn't be a guess.